The reservation at Coastal Prime was for 7:30, and I arrived 15 minutes early out of habit. My mother's 55th birthday celebration was being hosted by my brother David, who'd made sure everyone knew he was paying for dinner at the most exclusive steakhouse in the city. I walked into the restaurant in my simple black dress, the one I wore to both work meetings and family dinners because it was versatile and comfortable. The hostess greeted me warmly. "Natalie, good to see you again. Your usual table." "Actually, I'm meeting my family tonight. Reservation under Harrison." "Oh, of course. They're already seated. Follow me." I could see my family at the large round table in the center of the dining room. Prime location naturally. My brother David held court in his expensive suit, his wife Christine beside him in designer everything. My parents sat to his right and my younger sister Emily and her husband completed the circle. One empty chair remained. For me as always. "Natalie," my mother called out, waving. "We were wondering if you'd make it. David said you might have to work late." "I made it work," I said, hugging her. "Happy birthday, Mom." "Thank you, sweetheart." Sit. David just ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon. "Isn't that wonderful?" I took my seat as the server arrived with the champagne. David made a show of examining the label and approving it with a nod that suggested he knew anything about wine beyond the price tag. "So Natalie," Christine said once everyone had glasses, "how's the restaurant business treating you? Still working at that Italian place? Still serving tables?" David mocked, his voice carrying across the table. "I keep telling you, sis, it's time to use that business degree Mom and Dad paid for. Such a waste of a college degree waiting tables at 30. Everyone laughed. Christine hid her smile behind her champagne glass. Emily smirked. Even my parents smiled indulgently as if David had said something clever rather than cruel. "I'm not wasting anything," I said calmly. "Come on, Nat," David continued, warming to his theme. "You graduated from Northwestern with a business degree. You could be doing something with your life. Instead you're carrying plates and taking orders. It's embarrassing." "Embarrassing for whom?" I asked. "For the family," Christine said. "When people ask what David's sister does, what's he supposed to say? Oh, she's a waitress at an Italian restaurant? It doesn't exactly match the Harrison family image." The Harrison family image. My father was a successful accountant. My mother had been a real estate agent before retiring. David worked in sales at a tech company. We were comfortable, upper middle class, but we weren't the Rockefellers. The idea that we had an image to maintain was absurd. "I think what they're trying to say," my father interjected, "is that you have so much potential, Natalie. We hate to see you not using it." "I'm using it," I said. "Carrying plates?" David scoffed. "That's not using a business degree. That's giving up." "I didn't give up. I chose a different path." "A different path to poverty," Emily added. "I mean, what do waitresses make? Like $30,000 a year with tips? That's nothing." "It's honest work," I said. "It's beneath you," my mother said gently. "Sweetheart, we love you but we're worried. You're 30 years old. You should be building a career, saving for retirement, thinking about your future. Not living paycheck to paycheck working in a restaurant." David leaned back in his chair, swirling his champagne. "I actually have some good news that might inspire you, Nat. I'm up for a major promotion at work. VP of Sales. 6-figure salary, company car, stock options, the whole package." "Congratulations," I said neutrally. "Thanks. The thing is, they're looking at my complete profile. Leadership potential, professional network, family stability, all of it matters at this level. And honestly," he paused, looking uncomfortable, "having a sister who waits tables doesn't exactly help my image as an executive." I set down my water glass. "Are you asking me to quit my job so you can get promoted?" "I'm asking you to consider doing something more respectable," he said. "Get a real job. Maybe I could even help you, get you an entry-level position at my company. Receptionist or administrative assistant. Something professional." "How generous," I said. The server arrived to take our dinner orders. A young woman named Maria who'd worked at Coastal Prime for 2 years. She knew me well. "Good evening, Ms. Andrews," she said warmly. "Your usual, or would you like to see the menu?" "I'll have the filet medium rare with the roasted vegetables." "Excellent choice." And Ms. Andrews, I wanted to thank you again for the scholarship. My daughter starts at culinary school next month because of you. She moved on to take other orders, leaving a confused silence at the table. Scholarship? My mother asked. Before I could answer, a man in a suit approached our table. Distinguished, mid-50s, commanding presence. I recognized him immediately. Richard Chin, CEO of Tech Venture Solutions, one of the companies in my portfolio. Excuse me, he said, addressing the table. I'm looking for Ms. Andrews. I was told she was dining here tonight. I'm Natalie Andrews, I said. His face lit up. Ms. Andrews. Richard Chin, CEO of Tech Venture Solutions. Your venture capital firm is reviewing our expansion proposal. I know we have a meeting scheduled for Monday, but when I saw you here I had to say hello. I'm David Harrison's supervisor, actually. Small world. The table went silent. I smiled at my brother's boss. Mr. Chin, lovely to see you. Yes, I've reviewed your Series B proposal. Very promising. We'll discuss specifics Monday. Wonderful, wonderful. I'm very excited about the possibility of Andrews Capital backing our expansion. Your reputation in the venture capital world is remarkable. Your portfolio companies have a 93% success rate. That's unheard of. I'm selective about my investments, I said. I only back companies with solid fundamentals and ethical leadership. Which is exactly why we want you as our lead investor, he said. Then he glanced at David, who'd gone pale. Harrison, I didn't realize your sister was the Natalie Andrews. The Natalie Andrews who owns Andrews Capital Partners. David who? I asked, keeping my voice innocent. Oh, you mean my brother David? Yes, small world indeed. Richard Chen's expression shifted slightly, professional mask slipping. Indeed. Well, I'll let you enjoy your family dinner. Ms. Andrews, I'll see you Monday at 9. I'll be there. He left and I could feel every eye at the table boring into me. Venture capital firm? My father said faintly. I pulled out my phone and opened my company's website, turning it to face the table. Andrews Capital Partners. Founded 2019. $850 million under management. Portfolio of 47 companies across technology, healthcare, and consumer goods sectors. And my photo on the About page. Natalie Andrews, founder and managing partner. That's you, Emily whispered. That's me. You own a venture capital firm? My mother's voice came out strangled. I founded it 6 years ago, I said. Started with $5 million I'd raised from angel investors based on my track record of successful small business investments. Grew it to $850 million in assets under management. We employ 23 people and maintain offices in 3 cities. But you work at a restaurant, Christine said desperately, as if saying it would make it true. I own 6 restaurants, I corrected. The Italian place you're referring to is Bellanotte. I bought it 8 years ago when it was failing, turned it around and used the profits to buy 5 more restaurants across the city. Total annual revenue from my restaurant portfolio is about $12 million. David made a choking sound. The restaurants were my first investments, I continued. I started working as a server at Bellanotte when I was 22, fresh out of Northwestern. The owner was struggling, on the verge of bankruptcy. I learned the business inside and out, worked every position from host to line cook to manager. When he was ready to close, I offered to buy it. With what money? My father asked. I'd saved $50,000 from serving tables and living frugally, I said. I took out a small business loan for another $100,000. I restructured operations, renegotiated vendor contracts, revamped the menu and hired better staff. Within a year it was profitable. Within 2 years I'd paid off the loan and had enough profit to buy a second location. 6 restaurants, my mother repeated numbly. 5 Italian, 1 seafood place. I still work the floor sometimes. It keeps me connected to the business and the staff. That's why Maria knows me. I own Coastal Prime. The silence that followed was deafening. This restaurant, David said slowly. You own this restaurant. I bought it 3 years ago. The previous owner wanted to retire and it fit perfectly into my portfolio. We do about $8 million in annual revenue here. Christine set down her champagne glass with shaking hands. When you said you worked at a restaurant. I was being truthful, I said. I do work at my restaurants. I also own them. You assumed I was a server because that fit your narrative of my life being a disappointment. Emily found her voice. The scholarship Maria mentioned? I fund 4 culinary scholarships annually through my restaurants, I said. Total value about $120,000 a year. I believe in supporting people who want to work in the industry. My father leaned forward. Andrew's Capital Partners. You invest in other companies. 47 companies currently. Tech startups, healthcare innovations, consumer products. I provide Series A and Series B funding, typically $5 million to $20 million per company. My success rate is 93% because I do extensive due diligence and I only back founders with integrity and solid business models. Like David's company, my mother said. Tech Venture Solutions. They're seeking $15 million in Series B funding, I confirmed. I'm the lead investor they're courting. The proposal is solid. Good technology, strong market position, experienced leadership. Richard Chin is an excellent CEO. David's face had gone from pale to gray. You're deciding whether to invest in my company? Not just your company. I'm deciding whether to be the primary investor in your company's expansion. My decision will determine whether they can move forward with their growth plans or have to seek other funding sources, which would delay everything by 6 months minimum. And you knew this? David's voice came out hoarse. You knew you were reviewing my company's proposal? I saw your name in the employee roster when I did my due diligence 3 weeks ago, I said. I was curious to see if you'd mention it at family dinner. You didn't. You were too busy mocking my career choices. His promotion vanished overnight in his mind. I could see it in his eyes. The realization that the sister he'd just publicly humiliated held the future of his company in her hands. Natalie, he started. I didn't know. You didn't know because you never asked, I interrupted. 6 years of family dinners where I tried to talk about my work. 6 years of being dismissed, mocked, and pitted. You were so convinced I was a failure that you never bothered to ask questions. We thought we were helping, my mother said weakly. Encouraging you to do more with your life. I have done more with my life, I said. I built a restaurant empire from a single failing business. I founded a venture capital firm that manages nearly $1 billion. I employ hundreds of people across my various businesses. I fund scholarships, mentor young entrepreneurs, and serve on 3 nonprofit boards. What exactly do you think I should be doing instead? The table sat in stunned silence. The VP promotion, David said quietly. Richard mentioned it was contingent on demonstrating leadership and professional network. If you tell him about tonight. I won't tell him anything, I said. What happens between us is family business. What happens with Tech Ventures investment is separate. I make business decisions based on business factors, not personal ones. Relief flooded his face. However, I continued, I will be watching how you conduct yourself professionally over the next few months. Richard mentioned you're up for VP of Sales. That's a leadership position. Leaders need integrity, humility, and the ability to recognize value in unexpected places. If you can't see the value in your own sister, how will you recognize opportunities in the market? That's not fair, Christine protested. Fair. I looked at her. What about tonight was fair? Mocking my career, calling my education wasted, suggesting I'm an embarrassment to the family. All while sitting in a restaurant I own, drinking champagne I'm essentially paying for since I own the venue. She looked down at her plate. Here's what's going to happen, I said. I'm going to make my investment decision about Tech Venture based purely on the merits of their proposal and Richard's leadership. Not on David's behavior. That wouldn't be professional. David nodded, looking grateful. But, I continued, I'm also done with these family dinners where I'm treated as a charity case. I'm successful, financially stable, and happy. If you can't respect that, then we don't need to do these gatherings anymore. Natalie, no, my mother said, tears forming. We love you. We're proud of you. We just didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't care to know, I said. There's a difference. I tried to tell you. You didn't listen. My father cleared his throat. Can we start over? Learn about your businesses, your work, your life. That depends, I said. Can you stop assuming that success looks like David's job and anything else is failure? Can you value the work I do even though it doesn't fit your image of what I should be doing? They nodded, all of them looking chastened. Then yes, I said. We can start over. But it starts with respect. Not pity, not concern, not attempts to fix me. Respect. The server arrived with our meals. As she set down my fillet, she smiled. Ms. Andrews, the kitchen wanted you to know they're trying out the new seasonal menu you approved. Chef asks if you'd like to try a few dishes. Tell him yes, thank you. After she left, David spoke. The investment decision. When will you know? Monday after the meeting, I said. Richard's proposal is strong. The technology is solid. The market opportunity is real. If he can demonstrate that his leadership team, including his VP of sales, has the judgment and character to execute the plan, I'll likely approve the investment. And my promotion? That's between you and Richard, I said. But David, if you get it, remember this moment. Remember that success comes in many forms. Remember that the people serving you might own the restaurant. Remember that assumptions make you blind to opportunity. I will, he said quietly. We ate in relative silence, the earlier celebration mood thoroughly destroyed. But by dessert my mother started asking real questions. About my restaurants, my investment strategy, my portfolio companies. And for the first time in 6 years I talked about my work and people actually listened. Monday morning I met with Richard Chin and the tech venture team. Their presentation was excellent. Their numbers solid. Their expansion plan well researched. I'm approving the investment, I said. Andrews Capital will lead the Series B round with $15 million. I have 2 conditions. Of course, Richard said. What are they? First, I want a board seat. Standard for lead investors. Absolutely. Second, I want quarterly reviews of your leadership team's performance. Not just financial metrics, cultural metrics, employee satisfaction, ethical decision-making, leadership development. I invest in companies that build sustainable cultures. Done, Richard agreed. In fact, that aligns perfectly with our values. After the meeting, Richard walked me out. Your brother never mentioned you were the Natalie Andrews. He didn't know, I said. We had a misunderstanding about what I do for a living. Well, for what it's worth, he's a good salesperson. Aggressive, ambitious. But he needs work on humility and judgment. That's why I'm hesitating on the VP promotion. Wise decision, I said. Give him time to develop those qualities. If he can learn humility, he'll be a better leader for it. Agreed. Thank you, Ms. Andrews. Welcome to the tech venture family. I shook his hand and left, heading back to Bellinate for the lunch shift. Because I still loved working the floor, talking to customers, being part of the restaurant that had started everything. And because success isn't about titles or image. It's about building something real, treating people well, and staying true to yourself. Even when your family thinks you're just a waitress.
The rain pressed hard against the windows of my condo in Portland, the steady percussion of a storm that felt older than the clouds above the bay. I sat on the couch with my laptop still open beside me, trying to finish a proposal that refused to make sense. My phone buzzed once, sharp in the silence. A new voice memo. I didn't hesitate. I tapped play, expecting to hear a note from a client or maybe a reminder I had recorded for myself. Instead, Damien's voice filled the room. Mom, I've been thinking about what we talked about. Elise just isn't reliable. She's unstable, careless. If we want to make sure the house and the accounts are safe, you need to transfer everything to me. I'll handle it. She doesn't have the judgment for this. The words landed like blows, each one tightening the knot in my stomach. 27 seconds. That was all it took to collapse decades of keeping the peace. I sat frozen, staring at the reflection of myself in the dark glass of the window. My face pale and unfamiliar. He hadn't meant for me to hear it. He thought he was whispering in the safe direction of our mother, shaping her view of me one more time. It wasn't just rivalry anymore. It wasn't the usual family scrape of pride and blame. It was a plan, deliberate and sharp, designed to push me out of the story of my own family. The memo ended with the hollow click of silence, leaving me alone with a truth that could never be unheard. I saved the file, set the phone on the table beside me, and leaned back, already knowing that tomorrow I would not wake the same. The storm outside had slowed to a drizzle by morning, but inside my chest the weight of Damien's voice memo pressed heavier than the clouds. It pulled me backward, into years that had quietly prepared me for this moment. Brunswick, Maine. Our childhood unfolded on tree-lined streets where everyone seemed to know my brother's name. Damien was captain of the football team. The boy teachers praised for charm even when his homework was late. I was the one with perfect grades, the girl who sat in the library during lunch. People remembered Damien's touchdowns, not my scholarships. Mom adored us both, but the pride in her voice always swelled louder when she spoke of him. Damien is a leader, she'd say at parent-teacher nights. About me, she'd smile gently and add, Elise is dependable. It was never meant to sting, but it drew an invisible line between brilliance and background. That pattern followed us into adulthood. When property taxes came due on Mom's old house near Main Street, I was the one on the phone with the assessor's office, sorting out late fees, filing paperwork. Yet at Thanksgiving, Damien would lift his glass and announce, Don't worry, I paid the taxes again this year. Mom's eyes shone, and I stayed silent. He perfected this rhythm public praise to keep me compliant, private whispers to cast me as fragile. At family dinners, he'd lean close to Mom and murmur just loud enough for me to hear, Elise works too much. She forgets things. I worry about her stress. I would chew my food slowly, pretending it didn't matter, pretending the words weren't carving at the edges of my place in the family. Now, with the memo still echoing, I understood those years had been rehearsals. The humiliations I let slide had built the foundation for this latest betrayal. Damien had been writing the family script for decades, and I had played the role he assigned without protest. But sitting in my Portland condo with proof saved to my phone, I knew the script was changing, and this time, I would not deliver his lines. The older I became, the easier it was to confuse Damien's words for truth. They arrived dressed as concern, but underneath they carried the sting of judgment. He would glance at my grocery bags when I stopped by Mom's house and shake his head. Do you really need to spend that much on fresh produce? Elise? Half of it will go bad before you use it. When I reminded him that most of it was for Mom's meals, he sighed as if I were the one wasting money, not caring for her health. At first, I let the comments roll off, but soon they multiplied. He criticized the hours I kept with my consulting clients, hinting that I didn't work enough to contribute, then in the next breath suggesting I was too career-driven to be attentive to Mom. When Margot's prescriptions had to be adjusted, he told her I was careless for missing the early warning signs. The bruises he left weren't on my skin, but in the shrinking space I occupied in my own choices. I found myself double-checking every receipt, rereading every medical note, rehearsing explanations before speaking. Then the numbers began to speak louder than his words. One evening, while reviewing Mom's bank statements, I noticed a recurring withdrawal labeled only with an LLC, Damien's LLC. Small at first, $100 here, $200 there, but steady, like a siphon. I traced them back 6 months, nearly $5,000 in total. When I asked him, he laughed softly, like I had confused myself. Elise, you misread the statements. Those are reimbursements for expenses I covered. You wouldn't understand. It's complicated. He tilted his head the way he always did, patronizing and polished, and for a moment I almost believed him, but the pit in my stomach said otherwise. I couldn't bring myself to show Mom not yet. The thought of shattering her trust in her son felt unbearable. Still, I knew silence made me his accomplice. I folded the statements into a folder and slid it into my desk drawer, the edges cutting into my palm as if to remind me that the truth was sharp and waiting, whether I wanted to hold it or not. Sleep never came after the memo. I lay on the couch until the sky began to gray, the storm outside spent, but the storm inside only beginning. At 5:30, I rose, pulled on a sweater, and moved with the silence of someone trespassing in her own life. The folder with the bank statements was waiting in my desk. I added new pages copies of utility bills, invoices, anything that tied Mom's finances to Damien's supposed reimbursements. I took photographs of every page, uploading them to an encrypted drive I had set up years ago for work projects. This time, the stakes were far heavier than any client campaign. At Mom's house later that morning, I moved carefully through her study while she was still asleep upstairs. Legal documents lined the cabinet, the deed to the Brunswick property, insurance policies, her modest pension statements. I spread them across the desk, snapped images with my phone, then returned each sheet exactly as I found it. The act felt both protective and invasive, but I reminded myself that neglect would be worse. Back in Portland that afternoon, I combed through my voicemail history, saving every message Damien had left me in the past year, the ones where he sounded charming, offering to take care of things, and the ones where his tone dropped, clipped and cold. Each file went into a folder labeled simply proof. The final step was physical. I drove to Brunswick and rented a P.O. box at the post office 2 blocks from the church where Mom still sang in the choir. From now on, anything important medical bills, bank correspondence would come through me first. No more disappearing statements, no more excuses. Standing in the parking lot, key in my hand. I felt the morning air sharp in my lungs. Leaving at dawn hadn't been about escape. It was about mapping the battleground before Damien even realized there was a fight. I drove back toward Portland as the sun climbed above the coast, a pale light spreading over the water, and I knew that what began as 27 seconds of betrayal was already rewriting every hour that would follow. The folder grew thicker by the day, but evidence without direction is just clutter. I needed someone who could turn it into something undeniable. That led me to a brick office near Monument Square in Portland, where an elder law attorney named Thomas Keene agreed to see me on short notice. He listened carefully as I laid out the memo, the withdrawals, the paper trail. When I slid the copies across his desk, his expression hardened, though his tone stayed measured. He explained fiduciary duty in plain words. Anyone handling a parent's finances must act in the parent's best interest, and any deviation, especially self-enrichment, could qualify as financial exploitation. Guardianship, he added, was only necessary if a court deemed a parent incapable. But in our case, the danger wasn't incapacity. It was trust misplaced in the wrong child. I left with a list of what to gather: clear dates, matching bank statements, records of Damien's signatures, any testimony from people who had seen irregularities. That afternoon, I started making calls. Mom's visiting nurse, who managed her prescriptions, remembered Damien insisting on paying cash for medications that were already covered by insurance. She agreed to write a statement. The church treasurer, a quiet woman named Ruth, told me she had questioned Damien about large donations withdrawn from Mom's account. But he brushed her off. She was willing to document the exchanges. The last step was the bank itself. At Bath Savings, I sat across from a branch manager who had known our family for years. When I mentioned Damien's LLC, his eyebrows lifted. He pulled up account histories, confirmed the auto drafts, and quietly printed records with official stamps. By evening, my dining table was covered with stacks of proof, each page another brick in a wall Damien could not talk his way around. For years, I had absorbed his words in silence, but now I held something sturdier than anger. I had receipts, and they would speak for me when my voice alone had never been enough. I gathered the papers into a binder, pressed the cover shut, and knew it was time to carry the truth directly into our mother's hands. I suggested a weekend away, just the two of us, under the pretense that Mom needed a change of scenery. Boothbay Harbor was quiet in early spring, the boardwalk shops not yet crowded, the sea air sharp with salt. We rented a small cottage overlooking the water, and for the first day I let her enjoy it. We cooked chowder together, walked along the docks, watched gulls circle above the lobster boats. I waited until the second evening, when the fire had burned low and her hands rested quietly in her lap, before I reached for my phone. "Mom," I said gently, "there's something you need to hear." I pressed play. Damien's voice filled the room. Casual and confident Elise just isn't reliable. She's unstable, careless. You need to transfer everything to me. She doesn't have the judgment for this. When it ended, silence settled heavier than the tide outside. Mom blinked, her lips tightening. "Finally," she said. "He means well. You know how he exaggerates when he's worried." I slid the binder across the table. Page after page, statements, signatures, notes from the nurse, records from the bank. "This isn't exaggeration," I said. "This is what he's been doing." She turned the pages slowly, her shoulders stiff. For every date I named, she searched my eyes, hoping to find uncertainty. But I gave her none. The weight of the documents did what my words alone could never do. Her face softened, but not toward me. It was sorrow, not anger. "He's my son," she whispered, voice trembling. "I can't just cut him off. I'm not asking you to disown him." I said, "I'm asking you to see the truth." She closed the binder, resting her palm on the cover as though it were fragile glass. After a long pause, she met my eyes. "I need time." It wasn't the victory I wanted, but it was a breach in the wall Damien had built. For the first time, Mom had heard his words without his smile to disguise them, and the silence that followed felt like the beginning of a reckoning. I let the fire burn lower still, knowing the next move would not be mine alone. The invitation came through Mom, not Damien, which told me enough. He had arranged a brunch in Portland, choosing a waterfront restaurant where half the family could gather under the pretense of celebration. When I arrived, Damien was already seated beside Mom, his arm draped casually along the back of her chair, his smile broad enough to convince anyone he had nothing to hide. The first half hour was theater. He ordered for her, joked about my late nights and deadlines, then turned his voice serious. "I worry about Elise," he said, glancing at Mom but projecting to the table. "She's been overworked, a little paranoid lately. She thinks there are problems with Mom's accounts, but it's just stress." Mom didn't contradict him. She sat with her coffee, nodding faintly, her eyes lowered. For a moment, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. His words were smooth enough to erase the weekend in Booth Bay, smooth enough to make me doubt whether the binder and the memo still mattered. But I had come prepared. I opened my bag and slid out notarized letters from Bath Savings, each stamped with official seals. Next, I produced a sheet of recorded timestamps showing Damien's withdrawals, matched against dates when he told Mom he was paying expenses on her behalf. I laid them on the table in silence. Our cousins leaned in, Aunt Carol adjusting her glasses to read. Mom looked stricken, torn between us. Damien's voice rose, sharp, cracking the veneer. "This is manipulation. Elise has always been jealous she doesn't understand real responsibility." His hand hit the table, rattling the cutlery. No one rushed to soothe him. They simply stared, the polished mask slipping in front of the very witnesses he had invited. I gathered the letters back into my bag, my heartbeat steady. For the first time, the room wasn't bending around his version of the story. It was bending around the truth, and the weight of silence no longer belonged to me. The fallout from that brunch rippled faster than I expected. Within a week, Bath Savings froze the transfers tied to Damien's LLC, citing irregular activity pending review. The numbers that once slipped quietly out of Mom's account now sat under a microscope. Every withdrawal a bright red flag. Thomas, the attorney, moved quickly. He filed for emergency accounting, requesting a court order that would force Damien to produce records of how he had managed Mom's funds. "It's the first step," Thomas told me, "but it's enough to make him sweat." Meanwhile, the church treasurer reached out. Ruth said the board had decided to suspend Damien's proposed charity fund until they could verify where the contributions originated. It was a careful choice of words, but I heard the truth underneath. They no longer trusted him. Damien didn't go silent. He called late at night, always after midnight, his voice low and tight with fury. "You don't know what you've started, Elise. You think you're helping her? You're ruining everything." I let him talk, let the venom spill through the line, and kept my phone recording on the table beside me. Each threat, each slip of temper became another file labeled proof. I didn't respond to his accusations. Silence was stronger than any argument, and it rattled him more than my words ever could. By the third call, his tone shifted from anger to pleading, but I kept recording, and I kept my distance. Mom sensed the shift too. Though she didn't speak of it openly, she lingered longer on the phone with me, asked careful questions, wanted reassurance. The doubt that had held her quiet at brunch was beginning to crack, replaced by something heavier recognition. I stored the latest recordings alongside the bank letters, the binder growing heavier with each passing day, and I knew the weight would soon be too much for Damien to carry. The decision came quietly, without ceremony. Mom sat across from me in the conference room of a Brunswick law firm, her hands folded in her lap as the trustee read through the terms. Every asset her home, her accounts, the modest pension she had guarded since my father's death was placed into a living trust overseen by 2 independent attorneys. Damien's name disappeared from the paperwork like it had never been there. From that moment forward, nothing could move without dual oversight. When the pen left her hand, Mom exhaled as if she had been holding her breath for years. She looked older and lighter all at once. Later that afternoon, back at the house, she took me into her study. Without speaking, she opened the desk drawer and pulled out a brass key on a small ring. She pressed it into my palm. "It's for the cabinet," she said softly. "Everything important is inside. I want you to have it." The weight of that key cut deeper than any signature. It wasn't just access, it was trust, finally given without condition. Damien arrived soon after, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. When Mom told him about the trust, his face flushed red, his voice rising in a torrent of accusations. He turned to our aunts and cousins for support, but no one moved. Their silence was different this time. It wasn't fear, it was refusal. He stormed out, the sound of the door echoing down the hall. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in his wake. I stood in Mom's study, the key warm in my hand, knowing the ground had shifted for good. What remained now was not just protection, but the map forward the life I would have to choose for myself. Months later, the rhythm of my life no longer carried the weight of constant defense. I signed the lease on a modest apartment near Casco Bay, its windows opening to the harbor where the tide rose and fell without anyone's permission. It was mine, paid for with my own earnings, untouched by Damien's reach or Mom's accounts. For the first time, the walls around me belonged solely to me. I kept the brass key on a hook by the door, not because I needed it for access, but because it reminded me of the moment when trust shifted into my hands. Mom still lived in the old house, her care now overseen with clear boundaries. Our conversations had softened. We spoke less about Damien and more about recipes, the garden, and the choir she returned to. She no longer asked me to carry her worries in silence. Out of the struggle, something unexpected grew. With help from the church treasurer and legal aid, I started a small community fund for caregivers designed to cover transportation, prescription gaps, and respite hours for those tending to aging parents. Donations were modest, but each one carried the promise that others would not feel as cornered as I once had. Sometimes, when I walk along the bay in the early morning, I think back to that first dawn when I copied documents in the dark. I know now it was not an escape, but a line drawn on a map. Each step since has been a point connected to the next, forming a route no one else could claim. I didn't leave to run away. I left to write the plan in ink, so it could never again be erased. People say money doesn't buy happiness, but they forget it buys something quieter: security. That was what I was after. Not yachts, not trips to Santorini. Just a life where one flat tire or one layoff didn't send me into a spiral. I live in Flagstaff, Arizona, where the pines are tall and the air feels older than memory. My house is a small 2-bedroom with creaky floors and a stubborn water heater. I bought it in 2016 after landing my systems analyst job at a medical logistics firm. I drive a 2008 Toyota Matrix with a dent on the rear bumper and no intention of replacing it. Most mornings start the same: coffee, oatmeal, and a quick glance at my bank account before logging in for work. I liked seeing the numbers tick upwards slowly but steadily. $92 $300 became $97 $200, then $103 $400. By the summer of 2024, it sat at $113,000. That number meant something. It meant I had done things right. That every skipped vacation, every homemade lunch, every time I said no thanks to takeout or drinks or new clothes wasn't in vain. My savings wasn't about hoarding. It was about being ready for emergencies, for opportunities, for the unknown. I didn't talk about it much. Not because I was hiding anything, but because people don't always know how to hold someone else's discipline. They turn it into judgment, or jealousy, or jokes. My brother Ellis once teased, "What are you saving for the end of the world?" No, I wanted to say, I'm saving so that the world doesn't end me. At the time, I didn't realize I wasn't just saving money. I was trusting systems. Ones I believed would protect me. Ones I thought no one close to me would ever dare touch. And then came the reunion. Every June, our family makes the drive to Lake Powell for a long weekend at my parents' old log cabin. It's always the same grilled food, badly organized relay games, and too many folding chairs. We pretend we're still close even when the conversations thin out after an hour. I arrived early Friday afternoon, the heat already thick in the air. My dad waved from the deck, beer in hand, and my mom was in the kitchen pretending not to be annoyed about the late arrivals. I unpacked, helped slice watermelon, and avoided questions about when I'd finally settle down. Ellis and Delaney showed up just before sunset in a dusty black sedan. He honked twice and rolled down the window, flashing that same crooked grin he'd had since he was 17. "Rowan Hale," he shouted, drawing out my name like a game show host. Still off the grid and making spreadsheets, I met him halfway down the gravel path. "Still making jokes that no one laughs at?" I asked. Delaney stepped out of the passenger side in a breezy sundress and sunglasses too big for her face. "Rowan," she sang, "you look the same. Still so disciplined." She hugged me, the kind of embrace that's all surface and no anchor. It had been over a year since I'd seen them in person. Ellis smelled like aftershave and Red Bull. Delaney like sunscreen and some expensive citrus perfume. They looked good, tired maybe, but polished in a way I hadn't expected. At dinner, Ellis joked about my mountain monk lifestyle, asking if I'd taken a vow of silence or just of online dating. Delaney laughed along, but her eyes kept darting to my hands, my nails, my watch, the way I passed the serving bowl, watching me too closely. That night, as the others made s'mores and told the same stories from high school, I caught Delaney staring again. She smiled when I noticed. "You're always so put together, Rowan," she said. "I don't know how you do it." I shrugged. "It's not that hard. I just plan." She nodded, slow and thoughtful, like she was learning something. The next morning, she was already in the kitchen when I came in for coffee. It was just the two of us that afternoon. Everyone else was napping or out on the water, but Delaney asked if I wanted to walk the lake trail with her. I said yes, more out of politeness than anything else. We walked in silence for a while, letting the gravel crunch beneath our shoes. The heat was dry, but the breeze off the water made it bearable. I could hear the distant hum of a jet ski and the low murmur of voices from across the cove. "I'm sorry if Ellis teased too much last night," Delaney said suddenly. "He thinks he's being funny." "He always has," I replied, keeping my tone light. She kicked a pebble off the path. "You've really built something solid, haven't you, I guess," I said. "It's taken time." Delaney stopped walking. "Rowan," she said, her voice shifting softer, "I need to tell you something." I turned toward her, a knot forming before I even knew why. "I'm pregnant," she said, eyes already watering. "I found out last week." I blinked. "Wow. Congratulations." She gave a tiny half laugh. "It's not good news. We're broke. Like really broke. Ellis's car got repossessed last month. We're 3 months behind on rent. And now this." The knot tightened. "I don't know how we're going to make it," she continued. "I'm working double shifts at the cafe. He's between jobs again. I'm scared. I heard myself say I can help. I didn't even think about it. I can send you something, get you caught up. No, she said quickly, shaking her head. No, I wasn't telling you to get anything from you. I would never ask. But she was. And we both knew it. Seriously, Delaney, I said. Whatever you need. I mean it. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. Thanks. I don't know what to do anymore. We walked the rest of the way in silence. When we got back to the cabin, Ellis was playing cornhole with our cousins like nothing was wrong. That night I went to bed thinking about numbers again, how much I could give without noticing it too much. The next morning I came into the kitchen earlier than usual. The house was still quiet, no coffee brewing yet, no laughter from the porch. Delaney was at the table leaning over my laptop. She looked up too quickly. Oh, sorry, she said, her fingers frozen mid-trackpad. I was just checking the weather. My phone died overnight. I nodded, swallowing the hesitation rising in my throat. Sure, no problem. She stepped back, giving me space. I walked over and closed the lid without looking at the screen. Storm's supposed to roll in around 4, she added as if that proved something. Then she smiled too wide and slipped out of the room. I stood there for a long second. My coffee mug was still in the cabinet. The laptop had been open, something I rarely do when I'm not using it. I didn't remember leaving it like that. I didn't remember logging out. A flicker of doubt passed through me. I brushed it away. It was probably nothing. Still later that morning, I changed my banking password. Just in case. But I didn't go further. I didn't reset the security questions. I didn't enable two-factor authentication. I didn't even log out of anything. Because it felt ridiculous. Because this was Delaney. Because suspicion felt like betrayal, and I wasn't ready to betray anyone, especially not my own family. Instead, I kept thinking about the number I'd gone to bed with, $5,000. 5 wouldn't break me. It wouldn't even scratch the surface. I'd still have over $100,000 in savings. And if it meant they could breathe easier, stop falling behind on rent, prepare for the baby, wasn't that worth it? I didn't bring it up, not yet. But I started imagining how I might frame the offer, something soft, something that didn't make them feel pitied. Maybe I could say it was a gift, a gesture, no strings. That afternoon we all sat by the dock, pretending things were as simple as the sun on the water. Ellis cracked beers and tossed out one-liners. Delaney leaned against the railing and hummed along to the Bluetooth speaker. I caught her looking at me again, quick, unreadable. I looked away first. Sunday came fast. They left before lunch. Delaney hugged me hard and said, "You're the best Rowan. You really are." And then they were gone. I drove home that afternoon, already planning the transfer in my head. Monday morning started like every other. I got up early, fed the neighbor's cat, brewed a cup of coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table. It was cloudy outside, the kind of quiet gray that makes everything feel slower. I opened my laptop, still half thinking about whether $5,000 was too much or not enough. I logged into my bank account, expecting to see the same familiar number that had greeted me for months now, 6 digits neat and earned. But what I saw stopped my breath. 0.00, I blinked, refreshed the page, waited. Still 0. I stared for a few more seconds, my mind refusing to believe what my eyes were showing me. I thought it had to be a glitch. Some temporary error. Maybe the site was down. Maybe I had accidentally logged into an old account. I checked again. Same result. I didn't even realize I was standing until I felt the coffee slosh against the side of the mug in my hand. I dialed customer service with fingers that didn't feel like mine. "Thank you for calling Western Oak Credit Union," the voice chirped. "How can I help you today?" "This is Rowan Hale," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm logged into my account and there's something wrong. My savings account is showing a 0 balance. That's not possible." There was a pause on the other end. Then a softer voice. "Let me pull up your file. Can you verify your full name and the last 4 digits of your social?" I did. Another pause. "I'm seeing a series of outgoing transfers from Friday night through Sunday," she said carefully, "all totaling $113,000. My throat went dry. "Where did it go?" "Several external accounts. I'll email you the transaction list." The email landed before we even ended the call. I clicked through, scanning line after line. $18,500. $12,000, $22,000 each withdrawal like a brick in my chest. Then I saw the names on the receiving accounts: Delaney R. Hale, Ellis J. Hale. The room around me faded. My brother, his wife, the ones who smiled across my dinner table and said, "Thank you for the lemonade," the ones who hugged me goodbye yesterday morning. I sat still for a long time. Then I stood up, packed a small overnight bag, and drove to Phoenix without telling anyone where I was going. I got there just after noon. Their apartment complex looked like it had been built fast, and cheap, sun-bleached siding, a sagging second-floor balcony, and a row of uneven mailboxes out front. I remembered it from one visit months ago, but now it felt unfamiliar, stripped of any charm I might have pretended to see before. I knocked once, then again. Ellis opened the door in basketball shorts and a wrinkled t-shirt, barefoot, and holding a half-empty bottle of orange soda. "Rowan," he said with a lopsided smile. "Didn't expect to see you today." "Everything okay?" I didn't answer. Just walked past him into the apartment. Delaney was on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She glanced up, blinked once, then slowly set the phone down. She was wearing one of Ellis's sweatshirts, oversized and faded. "I know," I said. The air in the room tightened. Ellis shut the door behind us. "Know what he asked?" Still pretending. "My account," I said quietly. "All of it. Gone." Delaney gave a single soft laugh like I'd told a mildly surprising story. "You're being dramatic." "You used your names," I said. "You didn't even bother hiding it." "Relax," she said, brushing imaginary lint from her knee. "We needed it more than you. You're always fine, Rowan. You'll bounce back." Ellis leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You save money like a doomsday prepper. You weren't doing anything with it." I pulled out my phone. "Then you won't mind the consequences." Delaney sat up straighter. "What are you doing?" I was already dialing. My thumb didn't shake. My voice didn't rise. It wasn't anger anymore. It was precision. 911. "What's your emergency?" "I need to report a theft," I said. "A large-scale financial theft? And I'm standing in the apartment of the people who took it." Ellis's face dropped. Delaney didn't laugh this time. I gave the address without hesitation. "Yes," I said when they asked. "I'll wait outside." They were arrested 3 days later. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard from a neighbor that Ellis opened the door shirtless with a smirk that melted when the badge came out. Delaney cried, of course. Someone recorded it from across the lot, and it ended up on the neighborhood Facebook group. I didn't watch it. The police report was cold, factual. Charges listed in black ink: identity theft, fraud, conspiracy. No room for sentiment, no mention of shared childhoods or lake trips or holiday photos. That night my phone rang. It was my mother. I stared at the screen for a full minute before answering. "Rowan," she sobbed before I could speak. "What have you done? She's your brother's wife. She's pregnant." I said nothing. "She's pregnant," she repeated. "You called the police on your own family." "She's not pregnant," I said. Silence. "What?" She lied. "There is no baby." The investigator told me. She admitted it under questioning. More silence. I could hear my father's voice in the background asking what was going on. Then a sharp curse, his, I think. I'd never heard him say anything like that. "I need to go," she whispered, and the line went dead. I stood in the middle of my kitchen phone, still in hand. The dishwasher beeped that it had finished. A breeze came through the open window and moved the corner of a receipt on the counter. Everything around me was normal. Steady. The kind of ordinary I'd worked so hard to protect. The next morning, I emailed the detective to confirm I'd be pressing charges and participating fully in the case. She responded quickly, grateful she said, and told me what would happen next. There'd be a trial. Maybe restitution. Maybe not. But the process had begun, and I wasn't stepping back. The trial didn't take long. The evidence was clean. The transfers were traced directly back to them, down to the IP address in their apartment. Keith, the digital forensic analyst I hired, testified with a calm clarity that made their defense look like theater. Ellis sat there like it was all beneath him, his jaw clenched, his hands folded like a man enduring an inconvenience. Delaney cried through most of it, dabbing at her eyes like someone auditioning for mercy. Neither of them looked at me. The judge called it deliberate and predatory. called it a betrayal layered in both emotional and financial cruelty. I didn't flinch. Ellis took a plea deal, 6 years in federal prison, no chance of parole for at least 5. Delaney got 2 years and 5 years probation. She made a short statement at sentencing. Something about desperation. Something about how sorry she was for the confusion. But she never once used my name. Never looked at me. There was no apology. I recovered $71,000 through the court's asset seizure. Ellis had bought a new car with my money leased under Delaney's name, but paid in full. They drained the checking account, and there was some jewelry the court let me claim. The rest, $42,000, was just gone. Groceries, rent, gambling maybe, beer. Ordinary life paid for by the quiet, disciplined one in the family. After sentencing, I walked out alone. No one waited for me, no messages, no apology calls from extended family. My parents didn't show. I didn't expect them to. There was no screaming match, no cathartic confrontation, just the sound of my shoes on the courthouse steps and the cold bite of January air. When I got home, I made tea, sat by the window. The sun was low, coloring the edge of the snowbank a soft gold. I didn't feel triumphant, just tired, but I wasn't broken. I changed every password I owned, closed every account and opened new ones. Spoke to my lawyer about sealing certain files. I bought a new lock for my door, not because I feared break-ins, but because I was learning how to be someone who guards things better. The rest of them stayed silent, and I started again. 8 months later, my life is quieter in ways that feel earned. I still live in the same house, drive the same car, drink the same morning coffee. But nothing is exactly the same. Not really. I've rewritten the rules, starting with myself. The first thing I rebuilt was control. New bank, new credit union, 2-factor everything. Security questions that no one could guess, not even someone who knew me since childhood. I learned how to encrypt folders, how to monitor logins, how to close digital doors without slamming them. I started saving again, slowly, patiently. It's not 6 figures, not yet, but every dollar means more now. It's not just money, it's proof I survived something that was meant to leave me gutted. I don't talk to Ellis or Delaney. I don't answer the calls from unknown numbers that started showing up last month. I don't check the neighborhood Facebook page where someone said Delaney posted a Bible quote about forgiveness. That's her business, not mine. Instead, I started hiking more. I take longer walks. I bought a used camera and started capturing small things, sunlight on pine bark, the curve of frost on a railing. I joined a trivia group at a local brewery where people only know me as Rowan, the woman who knows weird geography facts. I'm dating again. His name is Carter. He's kind and a little awkward and knows when to leave things alone. I haven't told him everything yet. I probably will. Eventually. But for now, we laugh. We sit in silence that doesn't ache. And when he asks about my past, I tell him I used to save too much and trust too easily. The rest can come later. No one touches my accounts but me now. No one else holds the keys. Not to my passwords, my finances, or my future. What they took changed everything. But what I built after, it's mine. And this time I know exactly where every door leads. May and Hollis's dining room had always been a place of comfort. The brick colonial in Upper Arlington smelled of roasted chicken and garlic, the kind of meal my mother swore would speed her recovery after surgery. Hollis fussed with the carving knife while May, her knee still stiff, stayed anchored at the head of the table. My cousin Lark snapped photos in the background, catching the chatter and the blur of hands passing green beans. Elias squeezed my hand under the table, a quiet anchor in a house that carried both history and fault lines. For the first half hour, everything felt almost ordinary. Hollis teased me about Buckeyes football stats. May kept urging seconds, and laughter lifted the weight of the past few weeks. I thought maybe, for once, dinner would be just dinner. Then Cormac pushed back his chair. The scrape on the hardwood sliced through the conversation. He was standing, tall and deliberate, eyes fixed on me. "You stole my wallet," he said, his voice sharp enough to silence the room. At first, I thought he was joking. The room stilled. Forks paused in midair, before I could even form words. He bent toward the canvas tote resting by my chair, plunged his hand inside, and pulled out his black leather wallet like a magician with a trick. He held it high, triumphant, as though the performance itself proved the crime. Gasps circled the table. Hollis froze with the carving knife. May's lips parted, but no sound came out. I felt every gaze pressing on me, the sting of suspicion before I'd even spoken. "I didn't take anything," I said, the words catching in my throat. But Cormac only sneered, shaking the wallet as though it were a gavel. My cheeks burned, my stomach lurched. And then, against all sense, laughter spilled out of me sharp, incredulous, unstoppable, because even in that moment of humiliation, I saw it clearly the tote wasn't mine. It was May's, and she hadn't moved from her seat all evening, and that was when the absurdity of his game finally began to reveal itself. The laughter that slipped out of me at the table wasn't just about the tote or the wallet. It was years of cracks widening all at once, fault lines that had been there since childhood, but no one ever wanted to see. Growing up in Columbus, Cormac and I lived under the same roof but in different worlds. He was the firstborn, the boy with the easy smile and quick wit. Teachers excused his missed homework because he could charm them into believing he'd make it up. Relatives praised his confidence at reunions, calling him a natural leader. Meanwhile, I was the one with notebooks lined in perfect rows, careful handwriting, and report cards taped to the fridge not because anyone asked, but because I thought it might earn me the same applause. May stretched herself thin on double shifts at the school, grading essays by lamplight after cooking us dinner. Hollis patched up neighbors' cars in the garage for extra cash. There was little room for indulgence, yet Cormac always seemed to find his way into new sneakers or the latest video game. If I asked, the answer was, "We'll see. Maybe later." If he asked, somehow later arrived sooner. I don't think my parents meant to play favorites, but survival leaves little space for fairness. Hollis admired Cormac's boldness. May worried he'd collapse without encouragement. I filled the gaps by being dependable, the one who kept her head down and stayed out of trouble. As we grew older, those roles hardened. I built a steady life college, a job as a forensic accountant downtown, a partner who respected me. Cormac chased ventures that sounded grand but never stuck a bar in the short north. A landscaping company that folded before winter, a tech startup that was mostly borrowed money and talk. Each time, he emerged with another story, and each time, May and Hollis clapped for the effort, not the outcome. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was strong enough to carry my own validation, but the truth was, resentment lived in me too, quieter but sharper, like a splinter you can't dig out. And now, as Cormac's voice echoed across our parents' dining room, I realized those splinters had been waiting for this exact moment to pierce the surface. A week before the dinner, May called me into the living room while Hollis dozed in his recliner. Her knee was propped on a cushion, a stack of papers spread across the coffee table. The afternoon light through the curtains made the ink on those forms look heavier than it was. "I need you to help me with this," she said, tapping the top page. Durable power of attorney, healthcare directives, and a note about the Clintonville rental. After the surgery, I kept thinking, what if something happened and no one knew what to do? I don't want confusion. I want things to be clear. Her voice was steady, but I heard the undercurrent of worry. She wanted me to sit with her at the attorney's office, to walk through the details, to make sure nothing slipped past. It made sense. Numbers were my life. Documents didn't intimidate me. I can do that. I told her, "Whatever you need." What I didn't realize then was that Cormac had been listening from the hallway. He stepped in with his easy grin, but his eyes were too sharp, darting from the papers to me. "What's all this about?" he asked, picking up a folder like it was a menu. May gently took it back, saying she just wanted things organized. He didn't press further in front of her, but I knew that look, the one that said he felt something slipping out of his hands. Cormac carried debt like a shadow, store cards, Payday loans disguised as short-term bridges, ventures that swallowed more than they returned. I had pieced it together from conversations overheard, collectors' numbers flashing on his phone, the sudden urgency when he asked to borrow from May and Hollis. If I became the one in charge of financial paperwork, his leeway would shrink to nothing. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the way he'd stared at me across the living room, the calculation behind his smile. He wasn't just annoyed, he was cornered, and a cornered Cormac was always dangerous. By the time the dinner rolled around, I should have known he wouldn't let the evening pass without a performance. The evening began with gestures so small, no one thought to question them. May settled at the head of the table, her canvas tote hooked neatly on the back of her chair, the one she always brought with her. She hadn't been moving much since the surgery, and everyone tried to make her comfortable. Cormac was the first to hover, fussing with the chair like he was some kind of caretaker. "Let me adjust this leg," he said, crouching down, his hands brushing the floor and then the bag strap. May smiled, grateful, and none of us thought twice. Later, when I sat down beside her, Cormac drifted over again. He leaned close, claiming he wanted to check the wobble on my chair, too. His cologne lingered long after he moved away. He made a joke under his breath, something about me being the human calculator who couldn't survive if a chair leg collapsed unevenly. It landed poorly, but he laughed at his own wit. Hollis cut him off with a proud mention of my work downtown, how the company trusted me to keep their books clean. For a second, I caught the flicker in Cormac's eyes, something sharp beneath his smile. Elias reached for my hand under the table, grounding me, while Cormac kept flitting from one person to another, pouring water, cracking jokes, playing the attentive son. He was weaving himself into the night like thread, never still, always visible. In the background, Lark was snapping away on her phone. She'd taken to photographing everything at family gatherings. Not posed shots, but candid frames. The little moments, she said, told the truth better than any portrait. No one minded. It was just Lark, her camera an extension of her presence. By the time Hollis carved the chicken and May passed the green beans, the room was warm with routine. We laughed about Buckeye football, traded memories of May's peach cobbler, teased Elias about still learning the family's inside jokes. Nothing about the evening seemed unusual, nothing to make us wary. But looking back, I can see it the way Cormac's movements weren't kindness, but calculation. Every step rehearsed to set the stage for what came next. The scrape of Cormac's chair against the hardwood was so sudden it sliced through the rhythm of dinner. A moment earlier, Hollis had been telling one of his familiar garage stories. May had laughed softly at his punchline, and Elias had just reached for the breadbasket. Then silence swallowed everything except the groan of the chair legs and the heavy thud of Cormac rising. "You stole my wallet," he said. The words fell sharp, rehearsed. His eyes locked on me with a certainty that made the entire table pause. Before I could answer, he moved with a kind of performance, bending toward the canvas tote that hung from the back of May's chair. His hand slipped inside, fingers groping for only a second before pulling free a black leather wallet. He raised it high as though it were a trophy, his face lit with false triumph. "See? It was right here." The sound that followed was not one gasp, but a dozen small ones overlapping May's fork clattering against porcelain, Hollis's knife resting mid-carve, Lark's camera lowering with a snap of instinct. My cheeks burned under the collective weight of every gaze. Elias's hand twitched beside mine, but I didn't take it. My eyes were fixed on the tote, my mind running faster than my pulse. It wasn't my bag. May had carried it in herself, struggling with her cane in one hand and the strap in the other. I'd even offered to help, but she insisted she could manage. From the moment she sat down, that tote hadn't shifted an inch. Her knee was too stiff, her body too still. She hadn't touched it since. The absurdity of it all hit me then, not just the accusation, but the sheer arrogance of thinking it would stick. A laugh burst out of me, sharp and uncontained. It startled even me, but once it began, I couldn't pull it back. It wasn't cruel. It was clarity breaking through panic like sunlight. "Interesting," I said finally, my voice calmer than I expected. "Tell me, Cormac, when exactly did I bring a tote to this dinner, or when did May stand and move hers?" The words landed like stones on still water, rippling outward. Cormac's smirk faltered, just for a breath. Hollis's eyes narrowed, tracing the logic. May touched the tote instinctively, her hand trembling against the canvas. Elias leaned forward, the air around him charged, ready, and in that fragile pause, I felt the first thread of his story begin to slip loose, the weave unraveling with every breath that followed. The room teetered in that strange space between shock and belief, everyone waiting for me to stumble. Instead, I leaned back, steadied myself, and turned toward Lark. Her phone was already in her hand, half hidden under the table like it always was. "Lark," I said quietly, "you've been snapping all evening. Can you check the clips, the live ones?" She blinked, startled, then nodded. Her thumb moved fast across the screen, scrolling through bursts of Candid's Hollis carving, May smiling, Elias passing the rolls. Then she stopped, eyes widening. "Play it," I told her. She tapped, and the few seconds of motion filled the silence. There was Cormac, crouched low near May's chair under the pretense of fixing it, his hand dipping into the tote, sliding something dark inside before standing up with that same bright smile he wore so easily. The air changed. Hollis's mouth tightened, his eyes narrowing with recognition. "That explains it," he muttered, more to himself than anyone. "Last week, a 20 disappeared from my garage wallet. I thought I'd misplaced it." May's hand trembled against the tote strap. "He asked to carry this for me earlier, said it looked heavy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't think, but I thought. I thought of every borrowed dollar never repaid, every charm-wrapped excuse, every time the family smoothed over his missteps because calling them out felt like disloyalty. Now the logic locked into place so neatly it was undeniable I hadn't brought a bag. May hadn't moved. The only one who touched that tote was Cormac. He shifted in his seat, jaw working, eyes darting around the table for someone, anyone, to come to his defense. None did. Elias reached across, his hand steady on mine, grounding me in the storm of revelation. The clip replayed in my head even as Lark lowered the phone, her face pale. The truth spread across the room like ink spilled on linen, impossible to blot out. Conversations died mid-breath, chairs creaked, but no one spoke. In that silence, I felt the weight shift. Cormac had thrown his accusation like a stone, but it was already rolling back toward him. Cormac finally broke the silence with a laugh that was too sharp, too brittle. "So what if I moved a wallet? You've all been dying to believe she's the saint and I'm the screw-up. Congratulations. You got your proof." His eyes locked on mine, and the grin slipped. "You think you're better because you sit in some office with spreadsheets. You've been angling for control ever since May mentioned those documents. Durable power of attorney, transfer deeds, health directives. You'd love to have everything running through you." I felt May flinch, her hand closing tighter around the tote. Hollis set down his knife with a heavy clink. Cormac kept going, his voice rising. "If she's the one in charge, then what's left for me? Nothing. Just the brother who couldn't measure up. And don't pretend you didn't know if she gets those papers signed. Every mistake I've ever made will be written in ink." Hollis's face sagged with something between shame and fatigue. "I co-signed one of his loans years ago," he admitted quietly. "Thought it was a chance for him to stand on his own. It went bad. I've been carrying the weight since. May drew in a breath, her voice steadier than I expected. That's exactly why the papers need to be signed. We can't afford more chaos, but there will be safeguards this time. No one will carry debts that don't belong to them. Cormac's bravado slipped, his shoulders sinking. For a flicker, the mask cracked no arrogance, just a man exposed. He opened his mouth, but no excuses came. Only silence stretched between us, heavy as the truth that finally lay bare. I sat back, watching him crumble under the weight of it, and I knew the next step would change not just dinner, but the shape of our family itself. Hollis was the first to speak, his voice low but steady. This ends tonight. No more hidden debts. No more pretending. You'll repay what you owe. Cormac, every dollar, even if it takes years. But you'll never again have access to our accounts. May nodded, her hand on the tote like a seal of finality. And the documents will be signed. Rowena will be our primary for health decisions. Financial powers will be overseen with safeguards. We need stability, not charm. Cormac's face tightened, a flash of anger sparking in his eyes. But the usual smooth words didn't come. His mouth opened, then shut again, like he was searching for a script he hadn't prepared. I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm. I've never wanted to replace you, Cormac. I only wanted honesty. I love my brother, but I can't carry your lies anymore. They're too heavy, and they were never mine to bear. He recoiled as if the words were a blow, his pride stinging more than any accusation. The room held its breath. Then, with a violent scrape of wood on floor, he pushed back his chair and stood. "You'll regret this," he muttered, though the conviction in his voice was already fading. He grabbed his jacket, the wallet clutched tight, and stormed toward the door. The slam echoed through the house, rattling the glasses on the sideboard. For a moment, no one moved. Then May exhaled, her shoulders sagging as if she'd set down a burden she'd carried for years. Hollis rubbed his forehead, the lines of worry cut deeper. But there was relief, too. Elias's hand found mine under the table, steady as ever. The air felt different without Cormac in the room lighter, if only for a breath. And in that breath, I knew the ground beneath our family had shifted for good. Weeks passed before the tension in my chest loosened. May spent her mornings at Riverside Methodist, learning to climb stairs again with a therapist at her side, her determination as steady as the nurse guiding her. I visited between work meetings, sometimes catching Hollis in the waiting room with his crossword, his quiet presence a reminder that even storms leave room for ordinary life. In the evenings, I walked the Chiato Mile, the river cutting through downtown like a dark ribbon. The skyline glittered against the water, and for the first time in months, I could breathe without bracing for the next crisis. The paperwork was complete, every document signed, notarized, and filed with neutral oversight. No hidden hands, no whispered promises. Transparency became the new language of our family, and it felt cleaner than anything we'd known before. Cormac's name still lit up my phone now and then. At first, his messages dripped with defensiveness, blaming me, calling me self-righteous. Then they softened into half-hearted apologies, followed by silence. I didn't block him. I let the space remain, firm in my boundary but unwilling to close the door forever. Love, I realized, could coexist with distance. Sundays became lighter. Around the old table in Upper Arlington, May passed stew bowls with a smile. Hollis cracked jokes about his crossword failures, and Lark's camera clicked as naturally as her laugh. Elias leaned in beside me, his arm brushing mine. Both of us part of something steadier than before. The absence of Cormac's voice, sharp and restless, was noticeable, but it left room for other voices to grow louder, ones that carried warmth instead of accusation. As the meal ended, I felt the weight of what we'd survived settle into something else entirely, not inheritance in the form of property or money, but in the dignity of choosing clarity over illusion. It was a legacy built not on what was left to us, but on what we finally refused to carry.